Thank you all. Let me try to direct the, or ask the panelists to address each other a little bit first. The first question I think I'd like to ask both Clarence Jones and Amy Wax to elaborate a little bit on something that I think they agree with and possibly disagree with. We heard Clarence Jones says that he wants to promote the pursuit of educational excellence and a greater assumption of personal responsibility, which I think is certainly shared by all of the panelists. One of the questions I wanted to ask is, what's the proper role of government? I did hear Amy Wax say she thought that there was a very limited role. Maybe she'll put it in different words. And then I'd like to ask Mr. Jones if he would elaborate on what the role is of government in promoting greater assumption of personal responsibility. Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to go first. As I said in my talk, I think the government does have a role. The government needs to take steps to provide a healthy economy, a sound educational system, a basic safety net, a hand up for people who are less well off. Certainly, I think all of that is appropriate. But the notion that we can go from that sort of basic set of roles to, once again, a fundamental transformation of people's behavior, I think that is a rescue fantasy of the first order, and it just doesn't work. I think there are some really pernicious ideas out there, some ideas that we really should get rid of that impede our seeing the role of government and the role of individuals clearly. I'd like to just throw out one of those ideas, right? And that is that oppression and persecution, certainly a history of oppression and persecution, is either an excuse or an explanation for bad behavior. I think that's just about the dumbest idea that I ever heard. In fact, I was certainly taught as a child that persecution and oppression are a reason for good behavior. They actually, the only way to overcome them is to engage in the best behavior possible, to put your best foot forward. So the notion that bad behavior is an outgrowth, an inevitable outgrowth of persecution and oppression is a terrible idea, and it's a false idea. And I think a lot of our notions of what the government can do and should do to us come out of bad ideas like that. Just one more observation. Isabel Sawhill and Christopher Jenks have this wonderful conversation, this wonderful insight where they say, and I think this is true and the data bears it out, that it's actually quite easy to avoid poverty in this country. You only have to follow 3 simple rules, and I'll just add a 4th, and anybody can do it. And they are graduate from high school, get married before you have children, take a job, any job, and stick with it and perform well, which is not as complicated as it sounds. And also, I would add, don't break the law, right? Do those 4 things, right? And your chance of being poor is in the small single digits. Now, this is not rocket science. Heck, this isn't even social science. And in fact, social science is part of the problem, because it's social science that is telling us that it's really far more complicated, that we need a PhD in order to figure out how to get ahead in this country. We don't.
Thank you.
I agree with virtually everything Professor Wax has said. I just want to say one point which I omitted to say in my limited period of time. Miss Heather McDonald, is that your name, right? I think you need a bodyguard 24/7. And the reason I say that is because the truth of what you say is so powerful and so relevant. And I wish it could be replayed over and over in a loop. In my book, I've referred to it a little more graphically. I call it the black killing fields that takes place. The white man didn't make us do it. You understand what I'm saying? That's not a direct consequence of racism. Now, what can government do? In the 21st century, I think that on the basis where for most of the 20th century, government was concerned with providing what was intended to be a level playing field in terms of equal opportunity under the law. In the 21st century, I think that there are limits to what the government can do. What the government can do, suggested by my colleague, Ms. Swain, for example, the government can enforce the laws. I mean, yes, illegal immigration. It's not undocumented, it's illegal immigration. That does affect the pool of available jobs. The other thing the government can do is, to the extent that it can, I'm not suggesting affirmative action to provide a level playing field, but I am suggesting that to the extent that, and this is very much current in the current discussion, to the extent that you can deal with problems in the economy that are beyond any individual's ability to overcome, to the extent that the power or the planning of government can make a difference in the economic opportunity, not giving a preferential treatment. I should say you're looking at someone that was as ardent and articulate, I believe, an advocate of race-based affirmative action as you could find, 24/7. And although he's not here to speak for himself, Martin King was the same. But as I said in my book, I think he would have come to the same conclusion that I've come to, that race-based affirmative action is not the answer. If you're going to talk about affirmative action, it has to be based more on economic need and class need, and race has got to be totally irrelevant. Behavior, personal behavior. I'm not a sociologist. I'm not, I have limited, I have 5 children. And so it gives me some experience, but personal behavior comes from a set of values that have to be instilled somewhere at some time. The person speaking to you is an only child of domestic workers. My mother was a maid and a cook, and my father was a chauffeur and a gardener. When I was born, they were too poor to have me. They didn't have a home. My home was in the home where they worked. So before the age of 6, I was placed in maybe 4 different so-called foster families, friends of my family, friends of my parents, and then my mother particularly, God rest her soul, and my father too, they put me in a boarding school at that time for indigent, colored orphans and foster children. From the age of 6 until 14, I was raised by white Irish nuns by the Order of the Sacred Heart. In those critical years, I had a sense of right and wrong instilled in me. I had a sense of values instilled in me. Now the question, I guess Sister Mary Patricia, God rest her soul, she would say, well, you know, Master Jones, you strayed a little along the way since you left. That is true. But the fact is that somebody, somehow, a fatherless home or a father in the home, yes, the statistics appear to suggest that a 2-parent family gives you a greater opportunity rather than a single-parent family. But there has to be a bedrock. Government can't instill a bedrock that says that you shouldn't go over and shoot somebody because you want their pair of sneakers. That comes from a sense it is wrong to kill. It is simply wrong to kill. Yes, we know that violence lies like molten lava beneath the surface of society waiting to erupt. it is wrong to kill. It is wrong to steal. It is, you're also giving young males who, I'm not saying boys will be boys, but I am saying young males who grow up in a society where to be competitive in athletics is to be strong, is to take out the opposition, to grow up to be strong and manly and so forth. You watch professional football teams and one person is tackling and throwing the other person down on the ground. You watch boxing matches, to be manly is to be able to get physical advantage over your opponent. But at the same time, there is something called love. There is something so fundamental about you have to love your human being. You may not necessarily like them, but you have to love them because by loving them, you accord them the same status of dignity that you want to be treated by them.
Thank
so
you.
Therefore, I just want to say one thing, is that the virus of violence, which is so explicitly described by Heather McDonald, should make us shudder.
And Clarence Jones reminds me that the nuns who taught me can also be as stern as a stern father.
That's correct.
But
I'll keep quiet.
I was going to ask a different question of Carol Swain, but I see she wants to get in here first.
Well, I think it's important for me to speak up and say that I do see a role for governmental programs. When I look at my own success story, I was greatly helped by work study, and my work study job turned into a permanent full-time job at the library while I was a student. I was greatly helped by the Pell Grant. I was helped by programs for disadvantaged Americans. They were not race-based programs. They were open to everyone. I'd like to believe that there would be always programs out there where someone, if they were willing to work hard, and I was willing to work hard academically as well as working while I was in school, that you could actually achieve the American dream, go from the underclass to the middle class. And I don't care. I want every American, you know, that poor white kid in Appalachia that has a dream to live in a society where there are programs out there, there are people willing to help. And many of the people that helped me, encouraged me the most, my mentors were not people that looked like me. You know, many times there were white people, many times there were strangers that encouraged me. And so never ever underestimate the power of a word to plant an idea and to transform a life. And so, yes, there's a role for governmental programs. There's a role for you as individuals to help people. And it's not as simple as Professor Wax makes it, in the sense that, of course, it'd be great if everyone could graduate from high school. I dropped out in the 8th grade, and so did all my siblings. We didn't choose that. I married at 16, not because I was pregnant. It was the only way I could get away from home. And so you don't choose the circumstances. There are many kids that are in homes that don't even have electricity, and so they can't study at night, and they don't have food. I mean, it's their parents' failings, but there needs to be places in society that can help those children. Newt Gingrich was not crazy when he said some kids ought to be taken from their parents and put in some type of institution and raised by other people. And that's all I have to say about that.
Okay.